two 3-2-1s, because the only thing better than 1-3-2-1 is 2-3-2-1s. So hello, and welcome to episode 231 of Quarkus Insights. We're going to be talking about Quarkus's journey to the Commonhaus Foundation. And so we've got special guests. We've got Guillaume and Erin and Sanne. So welcome all.
Hello. Happy New Year, first of all, right?
Yeah. Oh yes. This is our first one. I'm convinced we did an episode last week, but if anybody looks for the episode last week, there isn't one, so we didn't do enough. Yeah.
If anybody finds it, please let us know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the stealth episode. So yes, happy New Year. And yeah, welcome.
I'm not ready for 2026. That sounds like still in the future.
Yeah,
so we're way past Back to the Future days at this point, right?
Yeah. I did a document a while ago, and I had Q3 25, and then I had Q4 25, and then I did Q5 25, and I was quite pleased with myself. I was like, wait a minute, that's not how quarters work.
I just feel cognitive load every time I have to write 6. I don't know what it is about having it be 6 now, but it's.
Yeah, I'm having the opposite problem as well, actually, which is that sometimes you overcompensate. So sometimes I'm tempted to put 2027, which is, a whole new level of future. Yeah, no. So less about calendars, more about Commonhaus. But before we jump into that, maybe we can do some introductions. You're all regulars on Quarkus Insights, but probably worth reminding people who you are. Maybe starting with Sanne.
Okay. Well, I've been on Quarkus since the beginning, but at the time I was more working on Hibernate primarily. So I guess I'm here today because I'm representing Quarkus at the Commonhaus Foundation. But I also helped get Hibernate in the Commonhaus Foundation, and I helped change the license of Hibernate, which is not entirely related, but comes from the same spirit.
So lots of hats.
Yeah.
Cool. How about you, Guillaume?
Well, you probably mostly know me for doing the Quarkus releases. I've been also involved since close to the beginning. I have been involved in the migration to Commonhaus, mostly by moving the domains from Rela to Commonhaus, which has been quite a lot of fun. And that's pretty much it.
Cool, thank you. And Erin?
I would just have to say Guillaume is both of these two are heroes that should get more credit for all the work that they do. Especially Guillaume. I think Guillaume kind of flies under the radar, which is super unfortunate. He needs all the hero capes, 12 of them.
Like they say, it's always a DNS problem, right? Everything.
Well, it's more than that. For me, there's a special skill involved in doing release maintenance and build stuff. It's a whole skill on its own, and Guillaume does a great job, and I think that needs to be said.
And it is one of those things that people only notice when it goes wrong, and then we yell at Guillaume.
Yeah. So here's all the superhero capes and credit for Guillaume for when it's not an emergency.
I will come more often when Erin is there.
Okay, so I'm the chair of Commonhaus, and while I did not start the actual 501c6 organization that's kind of underneath it, this is my crazy idea. This whole epic adventure is my insane idea. So
excellent. And so I think we don't have any slides, so we're just going to be doing conversation. So if you have questions, please do ask them in the chat, and we will pass them on. And I want to ask, what is Commonhaus? But before we go on to that, I think I need to ask, because probably every single person watching this now wants to know what 501c6 is.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. So 501c6 is a United States construct. It means you are a nonprofit organization. There are two types. There's 501c3, which is charity. And the Apache Foundation, for example, is a 501c3, which means all of your contributions, if you make any to Apache, are tax deductible as an individual. A 501c6 is a trade group. And so that's a little bit of a different designation. It's still nonprofit, So you still have constraints on whether or how you can earn profit specifically. But a trade group is required to provide benefits to the members. And it's more, it can feel, depending on how it's run, it can feel more corporate-y. There was, when I was doing research, which we were going to get into, the feeling that I got talking to open source experts, mostly from the Red Hat Open Source Project Office, which, let me tell you, their experience in the open source community is deep. They have so much there. It's outstanding. Was that Apache kind of got grandfathered in? Like, it asked to become an open source foundation before the government really realized what these things were for, and who they benefit. Because ultimately you can think about it as every open source project ends up, in a lot of cases, benefiting commercial entities. So the government's sort of like, this is software, it ends up being for commercial purposes. No, you can't be a charity for public good. Right. So that's what a 501c6 is. It's got it's still nonprofit, but it has a few more constraints in terms of target audience and like the tax benefits are different. It's not tax deductible, but it could be a work expense. There's some different, slightly different rules.
I.e. call a lawyer.
Well, basically.
Yeah. Or call Erin now. See, that's the thing, because Erin used to be a software engineer and now he's like a financial engineer.
So I have over here in my craft explosion office, I have a tote bag, because I've decided actually that backpacks, I don't actually like them. Tote bags work way better on planes and stuff because they just open better. I rearranged with my sewing machine, which I have. I'm turning into my mother. Weird. But I redid the entire inside of this tote bag while ingesting hours of YouTube content on nonprofit legal structures. Because I'm like, I need to understand how this stuff works, but it is so boring. So my ADHD stuff.
At what point in your software engineering career did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?
I didn't. And so Holly, like one of our longtime mentors, Ian Robinson, right? He just retired, most brilliant, just generous, caring person, like the best mentor you could ever ask for. I told him I was going to have this idea and he laughed at me. I mean, he's been known me for like 25 years, right? So his justification was sound, but he was like, Erin, you are going to do a foundation. How? Wait, you have the attention span of a flea. How is this going to work? So yeah.
Yeah, I always say it's like some aspects of Quarkus, that the sort of the model is completely Clément suffers so that you don't have to. And with this aspect, the model is completely Erin suffers and learns about tax law so you don't have to.
Exactly.
But probably this is a good time to rewind now that we've like discovered how your life has been ruined, to sort of, what problem were we trying to solve? What is Commonhaus and well,
so
let's start with what is Commonhaus.
This wild idea. So I'm actually going to tell you about the research because it led into why this thing exists to begin with. So we were thinking about, quite honestly, about a foundation for Quarkus, right? That was what led me to the question. And we'll talk a little more about motivations and specifically for Quarkus in a bit, but that led me to start unboxing, like what other foundations exist? How do they exist? How do they work? And there is quite a big variety, but there are also some changes that have happened in just the last 5 years that have kind of changed how foundations can work. So you have Apache and you have Eclipse, and both of those were founded in the early 2000s. So if you think about the early days of app servers, which was late 90s into early 2000s, and honestly, like where the Eclipse IDE came from, right? Eclipse was born out of the open sourcing of the Eclipse IDE, which is hilarious when you think about it. For me, I think it's funny, but I'm maybe easily amused. So Apache.
There's a mouse running across. You can get your attention.
Apache was, yeah, right. Apache was kind of built around the Apache way. If you think about it, that's very much a core to their brand. They wanted to teach, not only help people create open source, but also teach them how to manage open source projects. So how you govern, how you release, what a project management committee is, how you make decisions, how you vote, how you use mailing lists, the way they manage infrastructure, right? Where they have strong, I don't want to say ideas, right? They just have methodology that exists for how you build and release software in an Apache way. And that's great. It has really good ties to the Java community, which I was looking at. I'm not the only Java champion on the call. There's a lot of us, but because of that tie to the community, right? That's what was in my mind. So I was looking at all of that, and that can be very heavy if you have a project that already exists and has existed for years, right? The switch from here's how we were governing, here's how our project works. It works really great. But if we want to go to Apache, we have to redo everything to do it their way. So like the coming in as an existing project for that one isn't so great. If you're a new project, it can be great. If you don't know what you're doing, it can be great. It's specifically this existing project that I didn't feel it worked very well for.
Yeah, can I add to that also? Like we were also interested in a foundation for Hibernate, right? Yeah. And Hibernate had a license that wasn't compatible at all with Apache Foundation, right? So that was another reason for us to expand the search, I remember.
Yes, good point. If you heard Apache, it's the Apache license. So then Eclipse, I looked at Eclipse. Again, Java background. So the next one that you hear most of the time is Eclipse. Now this Eclipse also has a lot of process, a lot of procedure. There's varying opinions about how, like if you can divert, how far you can move away from that procedure and define your own. But there is like a lot of documentation for how a project should function. And Eclipse wording and policy is, again, I think it's because of its heredity coming from an IBM, right? Eclipse is essentially an IBM thing, or it was in the old days. And OCI, whatever that acronym was. OCI was acquired by IBM and then they open sourced that. But anyway, it comes from all that. So pedigree and IP concerns are part of all of the Eclipse procedures. If you were to compare your onboarding for both of them, there's a much more dominant thread about IP concerns in the Eclipse language. So that's one part. The next part, right, there's strong affiliation with the Java community, obviously. So that was a good thing as far as I was concerned. But, and this is somewhat subjective, and I'm sure there are people in the chat who will object, but this is me doing research of all of the things. And there are people who feel that Eclipse has gotten too corporate. Corporations are members. Apache has individual members, and you can donate as a corporate sponsor. But Eclipse has corporate sponsors. And those sponsors, if you're a high enough contributor, become members of the Eclipse board, right? So it's all about corporate contributions that are forming that. And there are some complaints or concerns, right, about whether or not enough benefit comes to the project from Eclipse. And there were some, I'm going to say bad experiences that some people have had with managing Eclipse projects where either they get no attention at all or the project was retired and there was a really bad interaction there. So there were some bad interactions with Eclipse that made it kind of not a great option. But I don't want to throw the whole organization under the bus. There's really good stuff that happens at Eclipse too. And of course, Eclipse runs all of our a whole flotilla of community standards, right? All the Java Jakarta stuff is there. So that's Eclipse. Okay, so what options do you have if you're not going to do those two things? And I have now, as a part of talking to all these people and thinking about what projects might be interesting, right? But beyond Hibernate, you start getting into solo or small group maintainer projects like Jackson, right? Jackson does have more than one maintainer, but it's like 2. So there's 2, and you have other, but they have they have their own process. They're chugging along. I mean, it's a well-established project. And when I talked to Tatu, he was not interested in either foundation because of all that procedure and all of that process that both of them define. Okay, so if you take those 2 off the table, then what's left? There's actually some really interesting options. There's software in the public interest, and there's the Free Software Foundation. Both of those will sponsor projects with no governance at all. Like they're just, one is they're both 501c3. And they'll just, no, I'm thinking not Free Software Conservancy. Where there's an SF, there's a somewhere in there. I'm sorry. Brain not functioning, but those 2 are both 501c3s, and they will hold resources. Like they will hold resources for a project, but they don't provide any governance. They're just basically, how can we help you, run a project? So both of those exist. Nobody in Java knows about them, right? Which for me, again, I kind of had the Java hat on. And they don't have a really strong affiliation with the community. They do, in some cases, have really strong relationships with some Linux projects, if you go look at the projects for those 2 things. And then I had, again, from the open source project office, I had some feedback that's like, well, both of those are fairly quiet. Like they will be there and they will do some things, but each, you would be way more responsible for running all of the stuff. So like as an individual project being there, you might not get the benefit that you want. You still have to do all the legwork, and it would be like project by project. And then I looked at the Linux Foundation, which of course has 1,012 projects.
Yeah.
And it has different things. Like, so we have a lot of projects going to sub-foundations of the Linux Foundation as well. So that's CNCF or the New AI Foundation or whatever. I can't remember all of them now. So the Linux Foundation, if you go there as an unmanaged project, which you can do, you don't get a lot of the benefits that you might get going to a sub-foundation, right? So like CNCF, if you join as a CNCF project, there's marketing and staffing and that foundation has defined procedures for how you contribute, how you go through their life cycle process, what their governance rules are. So that's like sub-foundation benefits. They have trademark stuff. They have IP protection. They have blah, 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 all the things. If you go as an unfunded project, you don't get any of those things. So you do get the Linux Foundation, which is a 501c6 also. So you do get that nonprofit thing, but you don't necessarily get any kind of governance promises, I guess you might say, right? There's no guarantees there. You're just a project.
And so sort of stepping back, like why, because I think you've just sort of covered a lot of it, but like for the community, why is it good if projects go to a foundation? And for the people in that project, why is it good for them to go to a foundation?
Right. So that gets into like, if you look at the Linux Foundation, what the benefits are or what sub-foundations do, right? So if I contribute my project to a foundation, what are you doing when you contribute the project? You are contributing trademarks, which include not necessarily registered trademarks, although those can be included, but like what the project name is, project logo, the things that represent the identity of your project. You're giving that away. You're usually contributing the code, which in a lot of cases now is the repository, which does involve allowing the foundation to step in, right, and have some control over how things will work. Part of what you're protecting from there is like hostile takeover. And in our case, let's see, now I'm starting to get into why Commonhaus exists, and I didn't know if we wanted to do that yet. But what you're looking for with a lot of these foundations is a sense of continuity, right? Like with the PMC at Apache or with the way Eclipse works, and there are some caveats there, it does do a little bit of continuity planning, right? So that if your leadership changes, that can kind of roll forward.
And what about, I mean, maybe you'll touch on this, but like vendor independence as well.
So that, yes, and that is a stronger thing with Apache or Eclipse or certain sub-foundations of the Linux Foundation, right? So OpenJSF is another example I looked at a lot, specifically for the Node community. The way they run, I took a lot of inspiration from the way they run. And they're not actually a sub-foundation. They are their own 501c6, but they borrow a lot from the Linux Foundation. So they share some resources there. And so those foundations, each of those impose governance constraints. Thou must have, mostly. OpenJS, the OpenJS Foundation is a little looser. So like they allow, I mean, for me, with the single or dual maintainer projects, right? It's benevolent dictators for life can be very successful projects. But an Apache or an Eclipse won't let you do that. A CNCF won't let you do that. All of them say you must have a multi-corporate, like a multi-vendor committee making decisions about how these projects run. Does that make sense? Commonhaus actually, honestly, does not do that. What I require for Commonhaus, we, again, this is my brainchild, so I will use I a lot, but it's a we. My rule is transparency rather than multi-vendor, right? So if there's a benevolent dictator, that's fine, but the governance policy for the repo should be very clear.
Yeah,
this is my benevolent
dictatorship.
If you want to have issues and you have an issue with me, for example, right, Commonhaus does provide for an actual code of conduct mechanism for a benevolent dictator, right? If you have a benevolent dictator off on their own and there's an issue, I mean, a lot of code of conduct issues are just misunderstandings, right? Because not everybody, we have this great neurodivergent population and words are stupid sometimes. So like it ends up being a misunderstanding more than anything else. And if you had a misunderstanding with that benevolent dictator, where do you go? You don't, right? Like you're stuck. But then Commonhaus says, well, now you have someone else you can talk to that will help mediate in the event there's an issue, even if it's a single maintainer project. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So that's the kind of thing. I mean, like, so if you think about what Commonhaus is doing, that's different than these Linux Foundation projects or sub-foundation projects. I'm trying not to impose thou shalt do it my way, but I am imposing thou shalt be transparent in how you work.
Yeah.
Right. And that, to me, that transparency is very important. Some ability to appeal if something's not working is important because that's how you make sure the project is healthy and has, any kind of escape valve if things go wrong. And so like when I started doing the map of all these foundations, I just found this gap. None of these foundation worked for single maintainer projects, and none of them worked really well for projects that were very well established, right? So you think about Hibernate. Hibernate has been running as an open source project with multiple contributors, and it has its community and it has everything established already. So moving it into any of the foundations that impose build infrastructure issue, like governance practices, infrastructure issue, like infrastructure model, all of that is incredibly disruptive. You're talking about months of time just to get that switched when they're already running happily. Why do you need to do that?
Hibernate does not need a leg up to help it get established.
Exactly. And neither does Quarkus, right? How many contributors do we have? 1,000, right? Like you need to have Guillaume doing amazing build infrastructure things. Why does a foundation need to say, no, none of that stuff works anymore. You have to redo everything. No, I know. No, just not. So, and again, like we have those two flavors. You also have the benevolent dictators who have no home. So that's kind of where this whole thing came from. It's like, what would a foundation that provides, it is vendor neutral ownership, Eric. So even if, excuse me, even if I still have a certain company that's primarily sponsoring a project, right? And we have members of a company that are doing most of the builds or issues or handling security CVEs, right? That's not necessarily a problem to have a single vendor for me, or at least as I consider it. I don't think that's a problem to do that because it means it's being managed. Good, right? My thing is the project should be healthy. How do we make sure that the project is healthy? That is the most important thing for me. If that makes sense. But Commonhaus does say, well, you're here, we are going to own it. So there is not single vendor ownership, which means if that vendor does go away, it's not a big deal to find another, to have other people come in to maintain it. And frankly, people leaving companies should be normal, right? Every employment place that I have worked at, which is all of this many, people are very long tenured, right? But that's not normal, actually. Most people move around a lot more than that. And so if the project is independently owned and someone leaves from one company and moves to another company, their ability to work on or have ownership of that project isn't impacted because it's not dependent on their employment.
Yeah. So if a vendor goes away, they can't take the trademark with them because it's owned by Commonhaus. And
Exactly.
if a developer leaves a company, the company can't hold that trademark hostage to keep them at the company.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Right. And so both of those can be very nice things.
So what kind of companies, what kind of projects have joined Commonhaus?
Well, I actually have quite a few. Sadly, I only have one non-Java project, and that's SlateDB, which is Rest. It is something I would like to pursue more aggressively now, is to get more projects from other communities that also, for all those reasons, don't have a good home.
SDK Man too. That's not necessarily a Java project.
Correct. SDK Man is not written in Java, but it is often used to manage Java projects. Its affiliation with the Java community is pretty strong. So, I'm kind of there. Otherwise, I don't even remember how many projects I have now. I keep getting more, which is great. And I don't want to pre-announce, but we have another one coming in soon that's going to be super fun. I love that is going to happen. I think it's cool. So I'm excited for that application to come in, but they haven't announced yet. So I want to let them, I don't want to steal their thunder. I want to let them do it.
But now you've got us all excited waiting around.
Yeah. It'll be fun. We'll have it all announced on all of our socials, which are generally fairly quiet. So if you follow them, you will absolutely see it. So I don't know where else we want to go next. I think I covered where this came from. I don't know if anybody has any other questions about that, but that's how I landed on this crazy idea. Also, it's worth noting because of the attitude that some people have about AI, that this thing would not exist without ChatGPT. Because I have the attention span of a flea. I really do. I'm an ADHD person. Like, don't ask me to write stuff. Like, I just stare at a blank page forever and it doesn't work. And so as I had this idea, I was like, I want some verisimilitude here. Like, I'm going to try to make something that looks real so people understand what I'm even talking about when I start saying that there's stuff missing. So like the first pass of bylaws and the first pass of, bylaws, right? Who the hell wants to write bylaws? And in the case of writing bylaws, ChatGPT is freaking great at that because there's 80 million examples to work from. So I would put in the Apache bylaws. I put in the Eclipse bylaws. I put in some like the GNOME Foundation, really good bylaws. I took a lot of inspiration from them. The OpenJS Foundation bylaws. Like, I threw all of those in there and was like, okay, so now let's make them a little different. And I kind of, made sure it sounded the way I needed it to sound so that if people looked at it, it's like, oh no, this is a real different flavor of how to run things. Because I thought that was really important. But it wouldn't exist if I didn't have, I found I could actually argue with ChatGPT and it would keep my attention. if I just had to write it, I would get so bored I'd go do something else. So
ChatGPT suffers so that Erin doesn't have to.
exactly. Yeah, the difference between just noodling on something and having something concrete was all because I had something to argue with.
And this is perhaps a good point now to sort of switch to Quarkus, and so look at sort of why Quarkus decided to join Commonhaus and what what it took to sort of go from maybe we should do this to it's done. So I don't know if Sanne is.
Yeah, but maybe I'd like to start from Hibernate first, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Just to go in chronological order there. Like Hibernate joined first, and so we in the Hibernate group, we have been considering many times, like, should we join the foundation? But every time, you realize, oh, it's a lot of work. And, the reasons we would look at it was to resolve, issues maybe in the community, but they were never, critical enough for us to really do something about it. So when Erin started to do this work, this was really, really interesting for us, right? And by the way, Guillaume was in the Hibernate team as well in the past, before taking over the Quarkus team. So yeah, in the Hibernate group, we had for many times a bit of an identity problem there. Like we were, as open source contributors, like both of us started to work on Hibernate as external contributors, more like as users, right? A long time ago, of course. And then, it was quite interesting when I joined Red Hat like 15 years ago. The what's my role conversation with the manager was like, just keep doing what you were doing before. That was so. And then for years, this has continued, like with no disruption whatsoever from Red Hat or corporate, with the exception of course, sometimes you had big customers that needed some extra attention that you would normally not give as an external person. And we always had this group working pretty much independently from the rest of the company because we were focused on this is an open source project and we try to run it in an open source way. But this came with benefits and drawbacks to balance out a bit. In several times we had a problem that people out there had no idea that Hibernate was sponsored by Red Hat. So some people saw Hibernate as an independent open source project, and this was not great for Red Hat's business, of course. On the other hand, people that knew that the project was entirely sponsored by people working for Red Hat, or not entirely, but primarily, right? That was the thing. This was a problem as well, because then you had other big companies that we really needed to help us to be a bit skeptical about dedicating a significant amount of resources, or maybe even full-time people to help us do certain things on the project when they had absolutely no legal protection of what we would do with that, and like no control whatsoever over the project, because technically the project's the trademark, like the intellectual property and all that, was technically just owned by Red Hat. So we had this duality. And it was a bit conflicting, like, okay, we are getting no benefits from the fact that it is not really tied to Red Hat, but on the other end, it is tied to Red Hat. But we were quite happy because we had a lot of freedom. We were able to do things according to our open source values, and we have had over time significant contributors from outside as well, but never somebody that would really be, say, responsible for releases or critical roles like that. That has always been somebody that had a full-time employment with Red Hat contract. So we wanted to address those aspects. Within our community, we were promising to people, look, this is an open source project, right? We want to run it in an open source way. It's going to be open. We want to give out control to whoever does the work. Whoever does the work is the one that gets more control. That's the better voice in the community. But of course, it's one way to make a statement about this. But then if you were talking with vice president of some other big company that really wanted to do more with Hibernate, they were like, yeah, okay, but what, where is the paper putting all of this in writing? And now a lot was still being done kind of properly, because honestly, Red Hat has good credentials in this space. Like, that it has a good reputation of doing the right thing with the open source projects, which is not always the case nowadays. Like, we've seen in the news many times that their open source projects suddenly, they change the license in some way, which they need to monetize it more. They need to maybe they make it closed source. And so this is also a problem for us. We wanted to make sure people would understand, no, we would never do this, but it's always, well, it's your word. And of course, well, it comes from a reputable place, but it's just your word. So if we move it to Commonhaus Foundation, it's not just a word anymore. It's signed off. Like, so a lot of, I did spend a lot of time, was it 2 years ago? I don't even remember, Erin. I wrote this big business justification document that I had to send up the chain in Red Hat to tell Red Hat, we should donate these projects to an open source foundation. And so we had to persuade people inside. We had some really good motivations to do it, and pretty much no drawback, because we're saying, like, well, the drawbacks would only manifest if you had ill intent. But since everybody's saying Red Hat would never do this, well, maybe it's best if you just sign it off. So, well, I wrote all those documents, and surprisingly, yeah, that went really smooth. Like, that was not a problem at all. We got the approval to sign off the ownership of this intellectual property. So, yeah, moving these projects to Commonhaus was really, from a legal point of view, just to get the Red Hat high up, the lawyers involved in trademark ownership to say that they were donating away these assets. That was the work from the project's point of view. Right? And Guillaume,
then there's the work from the lawyer's point of view, but we don't have to do that part. That's what the lawyers are for.
Guillaume, do you want to add something to
that? Yeah, sure. So we from the work that was done on Hibernate, and I have to also thank Johan Rodier for everything he did on the Hibernate side, and that we were able to just copy and clone for moving Quarkus to Commonhaus. I think we are trying to make a promise that we will keep it under the open source way, welcoming contributions. We are trying hard with Quarkus to welcome every contribution, make sure that it's a nice environment for people to innovate. We have seen the Quarkiverse, for instance, that we created, which is a wide community of extensions that come from all over the place. Some are maintained by members of the core team, but a lot of them are maintained by members of other companies. And I think it has evolved in a very nice ecosystem of extensions coming from all over the world, with companies contributing what they are actually needing to use Quarkus. And also what I would like to see more, really, is that for me, Commonhaus is also a way to fund the project, the open source projects. And in the long term, what I would like to see is that we, Quarkus, have enough community funds to actually fund a community event and get some community contributors to some place with the core members and have a nice chat discussion, design discussions in real life with the extended Quarkus community. We have been doing that with people who are at Red Hat. At some conferences, we were able to include some external people in this. But yeah, I would like us to to be able to fund all these open source projects, Jackson, Quarkus, SDKMN, and all the others in Commonhaus, and be able to, do some nice community events and things like that.
Is this a good time to talk about money and like how does money go into Commonhaus and what does then the money get spent on?
Yeah, so this is also, and I didn't mention it earlier with research, this is also another thing that has happened in the last 5 years, maybe 7 at this point. I don't know, time is stupid. But we have Open Collective that came around, right? And the Open Source Collective, which is a sub-collective under that. And Open Source Collective does a great job for projects, helping them raise money, right? That's another, Open Source Collective is another 501c6. So individual projects can go there also, but there's no, tying back to the other thing, Open Source Collective can do 501c6 finance stuff, but it doesn't do any governance, transparency kind of stuff. And they can hold trademarks for you. It's similar to software in the public interest in that way. Just to mention that. From the foundation's perspective, as a 501c6, we're required to maintain restricted funds for each project. Anyone that contributes to the foundation can make a choice. Do they want to contribute to the foundation generally, or do they want to contribute to any one of the projects individually? How we then manage funds right now, honestly, the funds that are coming in, a lot of it is going to legal because we have trademarks to transfer, and those are expensive. They're expensive. The lawyer time is expensive. So that chews up a lot right now. But like the foundation is now starting to have, yes to the question, IBM is currently the only big funder. But we have an increasing number of little funders. My personal preference would be a lot more little funders, right? We need the corporate contributions because those tend to be bigger checks. But I would love to have a lot more people doing, small things. And one of the things that, the inspiration for individual sponsors, for individual members, actually comes from another community that I'm in. It's the Obsidian community, where anytime you make a plugin, people use Buy Me a Coffee or Ko-Fi or whatever to just give you $5, $10, $8. And I was hoping that people would want to do just that little chip in, and we'd end up with, a big enough community of that we're kind of self-sustaining, at least all of the baseline stuff. And we're pretty much there where we can cover. Yay, Jeremy! Yeah, he's a little funder, and I love that. Like, I just wanted a whole bunch of just little people, like just us as individuals supporting each other. That to me feels the best. But in all honesty, to like fund travel, to fund all the trademarks, we need much bigger chunks of money. And so, Erin, there's things, stretch goals, right? Like Holly, I know as our career has grown, it's always like you get comfortable and then you have to stretch. Well, Erin's stretch goal is getting better at asking for money. I'm so terrible at it. I'm so bad. But that's like the next step. Now we're established, we're getting trademarks transferred, we have a bunch of projects. Now I got to start actually doing, fundraising in earnest. And, that will happen. My goal would again be to try to get away from the usual suspects. So IBM's big funder, I'll be completely transparent here. It's a bit of self-interest. IBM has trademarks to finish transferring. They want to finish transferring them. That's expensive, right? The money doesn't grow on trees. That money has to come from somewhere. And any project that has registered trademarks that wants to transfer those trademarks has to help pay for that transfer because it's a big cost, right? So that's just how it has to work, because I can't get enough money from $8 per person to cover all of the costs of trademarks. And I try to make a distinction between services that benefit everyone and services that are per project. And Open Source Collectives does this too, for example. So if you want Open Source Collective to hold your trademark. You can cover the legal cost for them to hold your trademark. But Open Source Collective doesn't do like the other governance and transparency and code of conduct and other things, right? So like I'm trying to find the happy medium where it's like, it's Open Source Collective plus some of these guarantees that make you feel like, okay, I'm giving it to something that's going to help my project remain healthy from a community sense, right?
But an important question is how, when, who pays for the stickers, right?
The stickers are important. So
stickers are super important, right?
Yeah, they are super important. Here's my thing. If people want stickers, they can, be lots of little funders. We will have more than enough money to cover stickers. Stickers are not a huge expense. And I think also like, we can cover stickers. What I would like and what I should do, because I'll be at DevNexus for the foundation, is to make stickers for all of my projects. Get more stickers for all of the projects, so that I can socialize and make more noise about all of them rather than just one or two. But we'll see how that goes. For t-shirts, who pays for the t-shirts? Well, here's the question, right? I think t-shirts should come from a fund drive. See, I have to get better at asking for money. But also like we have a merch store, so you could go buy a t-shirt. I think Quarkus also has merch that James Cobb, who should get also way more credit than he gets for being an awesome designer. You can also go buy Quarkus merch if you want it.
Yeah, I don't think we are talking about that a lot, and we should probably make it more prominent. Erin, you were talking about people when you were talking about small founders, but what I would also like is that we get small companies.
Yes. I should have mentioned that. Like the tiers for Commonhaus, so usually have any foundation has sponsorship tiers. The tiers for Commonhaus are comparatively really low. And that's explicitly to be more accessible for small companies. The other thing I would like, and I meant to say this earlier, is to get away from the usual suspects. I would like to get more companies that use Hibernate and that use Quarkus, right? Rather than just the ones that make it. Like the usual suspects for sponsoring are the ones that make the libraries, not the ones that use the libraries, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's one important thing about Commonhaus. When prior to me joining Red Hat, I was working at a small company, and we were using Hibernate, but we weren't using anything else from the Red Hat stack, and we were really too small to become a Red Hat customer. It didn't make any sense. But if we had the opportunity to actually contribute to some money to Hibernate with Open Collective or whatever, I hope we would have done that. And that's what all this enables, in my opinion, is that the actual users can also donate directly to the projects, to the foundation, to help fund them and make sure that we can continue what we are doing. It doesn't pay our salary, so we need some companies to actually hire us, but still, it's still nice to be able to meet, and I would like for it to be a way to get some funding for that.
And I want to go back to the. Sorry, Erin, I want to go back to the merch store because you mentioned that you have a merch store, and so I tried to find the link to put it into the chat.
There isn't there. I was just typing at James. I'm like, we don't have it on there anywhere. So I will add that. I'm like actively being like, whoops.
Okay,
we need to put that on there.
Yeah, check back shortly, and there will be a merch store. Good idea, Bruno.
Yes. Thank you, Bruno.
Sorry, Erin, go on.
No, that was it. I was going to say exactly that. I'm like,
Yeah, I saw you looking sort of slightly worried, and it was like, not just me.
Nope, not just you.
Yeah. So have we already talked about licensing?
That we haven't directly. So another distinguisher, I guess, with Commonhaus is that it's any OSI approved license. I'm not particularly picky. That is consistent with what I think OpenJS Foundation does, SPI will do, the GNOME Foundation does that's all GNOME stuff. SPI, SFC, Linux Foundation unfunded project. Yeah, I think, I'm not sure. CNCF may also say any OSI license. I don't know if they require one or the other. I can't remember off the top of my head. But that's...
And in case people don't know what OSI is,
that's Open Source Initiative. Oh, acronyms. Acronyms are terrible. But they define all kinds of licenses and help you understand how to use them and where you might want one or over the other.
So we've got about 9 minutes left. And I think we sort of touched on this a little bit with some of the discussion of funding, and we touched on it a little bit with some of the discussion about sort of licenses and that kind of thing. But does anybody want to have opinions and thoughts on the future of open source? Because I think we're sort of at a kind of an interesting point in the sort of the open source evolution, where we are seeing a lot of projects go to a closed source license, which is sad to see. So how does Commonhaus sort of fit into that bigger macro picture?
Well, we're certainly encouraging people to keep their projects open source, right? And because of transparent governance and ownership of all of the things, right? We're definitely saying this is going to be, you are promising that you're going to remain open source. I do have a caveat with that with Commonhaus, which is a little unusual in that projects can leave. And so I know that might make people a little alarmed, but for me, that's a check and balance between how the foundation functions and how the project functions. It's mutual incentive, right? If a project starts being really badly behaved, I want to be able to kick them out. At the same token, if we end up being really badly behaved, I want them to leave. So, I want them to be able to leave. So that is, hopefully that never happens. Because we are, there is a caveat there also in that because we are a 501c6, a project leaving must go to another 501c6 or 501c3 or like another nonprofit organization. So the donation is permanent, right? But they can leave and go to another foundation. And again, that's I want incentive for us to remain well-behaved. And I want projects to have incentive to remain well-behaved, because that's how we keep a healthy relationship, I guess, a healthy balance of control too.
So this should give people a good reassurance that these projects cannot go closed source, like, or they cannot do evil stuff.
Yes. Yeah, evil stuff. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, how do Red Hat builds of Quarkus fit into this? So there is nothing in the nature of having an open source project in a foundation that would prevent a company from providing supported, support products, right, for that open source project. That's the answer of Red Hat build of Quarkus. So there's Quarkus, which is the open source project. Red Hat as a company is providing supported build and offering around that project. Am I summarizing that properly, Sanne and Guillaume?
But does that mean that the Red Hat build of Quarkus is not part of Commonhaus? It's a
Correct.
vendor-supported thing specific to Red Hat.
Correct.
Yes, it's separate. It also adds the benefit of, anybody out there could start their own build of Quarkus and support it.
Correct. That's actually when I was looking at our trademark policy, for example, there's usually all kinds of what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say related to trademarks in terms of ensuring that you always give correct credit, like who is the authoritative source of Quarkus, for example. And I loved that Red Hat did the build of Quarkus phrasing. I think that's brilliant. I think it really separates, here's the company, what the company is doing, and here's what the open source project is doing. Both are mentioned. And Holly, I know with IBM, we've always had the case of like, let's get the most terrible product name ever. And the worst part about the most terrible product name ever is that it never, like, it frequently did not contain any reference to the open source project it was built on.
So you had to like find a mapping table, and there was no mapping table.
Right. And I think actually Red Hat had this problem with one of their products also, right? And so it was like, is the company's contribution or participation in the community being recognized? Is the project being recognized, right? That build of phrasing, I think, gives credit to both companies, and I really appreciate that. So I put it deliberately, like in the trademark policy, this one's good. Because I think the phrasing gives credit to all the right people.
And of course, those commercial builds are really important to the financial sustainability of open source as a model.
There's more to it than that these days also, in that we have, like, the reality is secure supply chain concerns, period. Yeah. There's no way around that at this point. So having companies that are willing to have commercial offerings that want to provide secure supply chain guarantees for how that project is built, like, that is important to the health of the ecosystem, and to the, so that companies are confident in consuming these open source projects. And that's just reality. That's why I don't mind if it's a primary vendor project for now, as long as they're transparent about it, right? Because that can keep the project healthy and usable and whatever. The restriction would be, and this is something where Commonhaus might have to mediate a little bit, is if there's favoritism or bias, right? Like if it's primarily sponsored by vendor A, and vendor B wants another support offering, and then all the people from vendor A are snooty about it. 501c6 status plus this open source license means you can't really do that. Like, you got to balance that out a little bit, but I don't mind having good shepherds that make sure a project moves forward in a in a sensible way. It's good to have a couple brains that keep things aligned, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So I think we're nearly at time. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Any more questions from you, Eric, Guillaume, Sanne?
No, I don't think so. Not from me. I think the vendor question was a good one, and it was one I had in the back of my mind at the start of the conversation. I'm like, Erin, I'm short attention span, and was gone.
Yeah, we are starting to be able to give, based on foundation, like some common services, right? If you go to our list of sponsors, for example, you'll see that Commonhaus is able, because we have a partnership with Gradle, right, to be able to give all of our projects access to Develocity. I don't think I have it on the web. No, I think I do have it on the website. We also have a partnership now with Scarf, so that people can get, no, I don't have it up yet. I've got to finish that. But we do have a partnership with Scarf, so that all of our projects can get access to their metrics. I don't know if people know, Maven Central is changing a little bit, and some of the detailed analytics that you used to be able to get have now moved such that Scarf is going to be the preferred way to get that data. And we have a partnership with Scarf so that all of our projects can get access to that. Yeah, it's recent, and I have to work on.
They want everybody to pay for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they have things for for open source projects, which is important.
Cool.
I don't have more questions, but I wanted to add a thought about those small companies that Guillaume was also mentioning. Like, yeah, we would be really keen to see more small companies and also large companies, any size. And it's not just about donating money. Like, I would be really keen to see more like people being paid by other companies or being employed by other companies full time to work on these projects. And hopefully the fact that this is in an independent foundation now would give those companies more like a reason to do so, because they're not, helping Red Hat to make money. They're making the project better, and they can support it themselves independently, right? So competition in this space would be really good for the projects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are at time. So on that sort of closing thought, this is probably a good point to wrap up. But yeah, Guillaume had to go, but thank you very much, Sanne, and thank you very much, Erin. Super, super interesting.
Thank you.
Yep. And we will be back next week.
Bye all.
See you all in 2027.
Next update.
All right, we're good.